Today we're going to talk about creating a culture of truth-telling. At Root, we believe it's time to free leaders from misconceptions about what great leadership looks like. This includes conquering blind spots that hold us back. We conquer these by leveraging purpose, story, engagement, trust, and truth. Today, our very own co-founder, chairman, and best-selling author, Jim Howden, is sharing what some of the best companies are doing differently to create a culture of truth-telling. My name is Rochelle, and I will be serving as your chat host. So please keep your chat panel open throughout our event today, and feel free to chat at any time. As a matter of fact, let's make sure that we can find our way to the chat panel. Would you please make certain that you are sending your chat to all participants? And make sure you find your way there, and go ahead and let us know from where you are joining today. There we go. Thank you, Heather. We already heard about sunny San Diego, thanks to Bee. Where are you joining us today? This helps us understand a little bit about our audience today. Thank you, Fiona. Good. Yeah, and a little weather commentary is always welcome, because we are certainly seeing the gamut today in the contiguous United States. Good. Thank you. Dallas is in the house. Charlotte, Chicago. Okay, yeah, it's okay. Sunny and cold is good. All right, good. Okay, so we span the entire nation, and that's a wonderful thing. And so here's the thing: we are able to communicate with each other via the chat. And we get to talk to Jim. So Jim, here's how it's going to work today. While you share with us what you've learned about creating a culture of truth-telling, we're going to get our wheels turning about what more we'd like you to share. We're going to put those questions and comments in the chat as soon as we think about them. That's an open invitation. And then about 20 minutes after the hour, we'll actually move into like a question-response segment, and I will draw the questions from the chat and moderate a little interview. How does that sound?
Sounds great on my end.
Okay.
Thanks, Rochelle. I appreciate it, and it's a great opportunity to chat with you today. The issue of truth-telling and truth in organizations is a big deal. As a matter of fact, it was so prominent in the way we've sort of thought about creating high-performing organizations and engaged people that it became one of the blind spots for our recent book. And the blind spot, quite candidly, is that leaders believe that when they give people permission to say what they think and feel, that it happens. And I think the blind spot or the misbelief is that people feel safe telling me what they really think and feel. We have rarely ever found that to be true, and we also find that truth-telling as a core competency really doesn't exist in most organizations. Safe to say, I don't think we found one in the 800-plus organizations we've worked with. So truth-telling is a problem and a challenge and an opportunity. You know, one of the ways to look at it is there are only 3 places we tell the truth in most of our organizations. Those places are in the hallway, at the water cooler, and in the bathroom. And if we were live, I'd actually, you know, sort of ask from the stage, how many of you have been in a meeting at some point and left that meeting with someone you trust and went to the restroom, and then before you said something, lean over to see if there was anyone else in one of the stalls. And while that seems a little bit odd, usually most of the people in the audience laugh because they've done that. And so the whole point of that illustration is that you just didn't feel safe to say what you really thought and what you really felt. And so I think the real reason for that is probably a starting point, and that is, you know, if you're an associate, an employee, a partner, or a team member, there are a lot of emotional things that come up when you begin to think about, do I really say what I think, and do I really say what I feel? For example, if I speak up and disagree, will I be the team member that doesn't get to play? Or can I be sure my comments will be taken the right way and my intention is for the good of the business? Or if I talk about things from my perspective, will people think less of me because of my answers? Or if I say what I really think, could that be a career-limiting move? A lot of the research shows the 2 reasons that people will not speak up. One is because of the fear of consequence, and second, because of the belief that nothing will be done or it won't be listened to. Leaders have some of the same fears, and so leaders wonder if a critique would be an indictment of their leadership, or what if I don't have all the answers? Will I be seen less of a leader? Or if I really have an open door policy, will we just have a complaint session that won't be positive? And finally, I'm not comfortable with how vulnerable I'll have to be if we really put everything on the table. So these different emotional thought bubbles really are some of the reasons why truth-telling is really not common in many organizations. There's another reason that's fascinating, and that is what we found recently in neuroscience. There's actually a chemical reaction in the brain whenever you have some sense of achievement or some sense of accomplishment. So for anybody, leader or an individual actually, if you get more direct reports, if you have a promotion, if you get a better desk space, if you have a raise, if you have your 15 minutes of fame, if you become the boss, that chemical reaction in the brain where it really causes you, and it's actually the mirror system of the brain is what it's called, it causes you to be less able to identify what people think and feel. So just to be clear, if your accomplishments go up, your empathy detectors go down. You absolutely become less able on your own to really identify with and think and feel in common with what your people think and feel. So that's working against you as a leader in many, many cases. As a matter of fact, if you go back to the Middle Ages, they had this figured out without the neuroscience, and that was there were court gestures, and the court gestures were around to sort of tell the truth. They looked comical. Some people thought they were fools, but they were very important to let those in power to be in touch with the truth, and pretty effective over the ages. The truth teller that we've been phenomenally interested in is Dilbert. You know, he's in 1,900 newspapers. He ends up in many cubicles and other spaces, and the cartoons all capture some emotion that people identify with. You know, when we ask leaders or even just individuals why they put those Dilbert cartoons up, say it's because it has captured what I feel, or it you know, really captures my predicament, and so it becomes very credible. We had a unique opportunity to sort of leverage that several years ago. We had worked with a company, a large company, for about 6 months on their strategy. Then we worked for 3 days with the top 250 people of the 63,000 person company. And we worked on the strategy, and at 11 o'clock, just before they all went home, we gave them an audience response opportunity to say how much they favored the new strategy. Now again, mindful, this is 250 people of a 63,000 person company. So if there wasn't a vote of confidence with these folks, there wasn't going to be a vote of confidence on the shop floor. And so the vote came back, and it was only 19% vote of confidence. The chairman was just stunned and somewhat disappointed. He said, which I'll never forget, you guys are really good. How do we get all our money back? And we said, just hang on for a second. Let's go talk to the people. And the people first said, the strategy is not the problem. It's our fundamental disbelief that leaders will change their behaviors to bring it to life. But then they gave us these different ideas. So if you look at it, and we drew it into a cartoon. And the cartoon, in the center of the sketch, you can see that there's a gentleman that says, I met my number, you can't touch me, so this change doesn't apply to me. If you could read the writing on the bottles in the bottom right corner, it would say non-confrontational water, so they really weren't talking about the real issues. All the leaders are wearing masks, so they're not really revealing what they think, they're playing along. The real issues are undercover. Some of the leaders are at the kids' table at Thanksgiving. They didn't even make it to the conversation table. If you really want to work with this CEO, you just slip a little note in his inbox and talk to him in private. All of these dysfunctional things we couldn't make up. And so as a result, we took this picture and showed it to the 250 people. And the first thing they said was, we can't believe that you were in the bathroom and heard what we really had to say. Secondly, they said, we can't believe you had the courage to show us this. And thirdly, if you're serious about addressing the issues that we've not really been truthful about, so are we. And how do we do that? Truth be known, on this company, the stock was at 26, went to 126 and split twice. And the reason was not their strategy. It's because they got the real issues on the table that they hadn't been willing to talk about. Whether those issues were about people that met numbers were somehow in a safety zone, or some of the real leaders didn't even get a chance to talk. We've done this with numerous companies, and these vignettes are some other examples. So in other words, if you didn't know how to talk about a culture that was sort of a comfort culture in the left, we drew a picture of that and then began to open the door to make it safe to talk about it. What a lot of people tell us is when they see the visual, they believe that we now have permission to talk about this, first of all, and they're often surprised that we had the courage to sort of just show what was really going on. The one in the middle was a bunch of leaders that were on rappel lines playing 2 or 3 levels below their pay grade, so they were micromanaging. And the one on the top right was really about managers that were being swamped by initiatives at the store level. And again, we had not had an opportunity to really challenge and confront this behavior until we visualized in a cartoon. The other way we do this, if we don't have artists, is called a wall of reality. And so I'll be a little bit precise on this because it's very powerful. But, you know, if we would pull together any team and ask them to identify the things that you are creatively dissatisfied with. In other words, whether it's the marketplace, the strategy, the operating model, the culture, or the behaviors of our team or organization, what are those things we're dissatisfied with? You put one Post-it note, you put it up on a wall, we identify it with different titles or themes, and then we ask the people on that team to go and check the ones that are most real, the ones that really resonate, the ones that are holding us back from ascending to an even higher level of performance and impact. And typically, we will get somewhere between 5 and 7 very specific truth areas that are the kinds of things that we're creatively dissatisfied that we need to act on. Now, interestingly, when we put all those up there, we ask these 3 questions. The first question of the team we ask is, how have you contributed? Interestingly now, because that is our reality, everybody has contributed in some fashion, and we've just created an environment of public vulnerability and of shared vulnerability, which opens the door to even talk about the truth more. We even ask, how have you benefited? So in other words, if there's something going on where people are not accountable and you've not said anything, I've contributed because I've acquiesced, and then I've benefited because I didn't have to challenge somebody or take them on. And then the question is, how successful will we be if we don't address the truths we are currently dissatisfied with? Now, one other thing we do is we turn these into truth statements. And what these are very sharp statements about the truth that when you look at them, you can't turn away and not do something about it. These are actual truth statements from 3 different companies. The first company was a whole building company, and through the process we just talked about, which was first, make it safe to talk about it. Second, identify which of those things we're dissatisfied with are most important. And third, convert that into a statement that we make part of our change plan. So the first one for a home building company is, we do not probe the business for performance, and we don't know the difference between good and lucky in our 24 divisions. This is a true statement. This is a real company, and this company in 2010 was the last in their peer group in home building. They obviously took this to heart. They shared amongst their team that this was a truth statement, and by 2012, they were the #1 performer on the S&P 500. But being honest and truthful was just as powerful, in some ways more powerful, than having a new strategy in terms of where to go. The second one is a fond one of mine in the sense that this was from a high potential development class at a manufacturer. And what they said was, we don't set stretch, credible goals that are owned and believed in through execution. That's profound. I mean, what they were basically saying is that the whole goal-setting process was a sham. It was a game. And what really happened, because they weren't credible, when we weren't achieving them, we just gave in or caved in and didn't even try anything new because we didn't believe they were credible in the first place. They changed this and began to hit their performance targets in ways that they never had before, but they did that first and foremost by talking about what is a stretch credible goal and what is not a stretch credible goal in definition, and then what would it look like in practice. The third one is from a restaurant company that has done really well that claimed it was all about their people, but this truth statement was, we say we are a people company, yet we don't prioritize developing people. We aren't good at it, and we don't like doing it. And so that was the very senior team of this organization. Same thing. I can tell you the changes they made once they decided to address that truth statement and the profound changes they made in the business. The business actually went from $300 million in market cap to $2 billion, and telling themselves the truth was one of the reasons that happened. So really what you begin to look at is, how do we begin to really challenge ourselves. The two pictures that look older are actually for the 4-minute mile and the Fosbury Flip, where at some point, sometime, somebody challenged the traditional ways to do it, and that was, you know, keep your mouth shut, be safe, and don't rock the boat. Or it can be like Netflix and Uber, who challenged and disrupted the way we did it. And so the disruption here is, how do we, first and foremost, make it safe to tell the truth, whether it's with cartoons or whether it's with walls of reality. Second, how do we create a sense of shared vulnerability, because the truth that we're all dissatisfied is not created by the other guy, it's created by each one of us. So how do we co-own that and then have co-accountability to change that? And then finally, how do we really zero in on those truths with the precision of a truth statement that becomes part of our action plan in terms of our go-forward improvement, whether that's in the strategy, whether that's in our culture, or whether that's in our individual behaviors. So, Rochelle, I think that's probably a good run at the opening comments.
Yes, Jim, thank you. Thanks for running down what the blind spot means and how we can address it. We've had a little bit of action in the chat, so I'm going to direct you guys back to the chat. Surely something Jim has said, something he's talked about in an example or science or just a concept that is appealing to you, and maybe you'd like to know more about it or it interests you. We'd like to know some reactions in the chat. So find your way back to the chat. Make sure you're sending to all participants. Let us know your questions and comments, and then I'm going to pitch those to Jim. And while you guys are doing that, Jim, I had a question to get us started, because when we talk about the ways that we overcome our misconceptions about leadership, we have many to choose from. And actually, over the course of the next few months, you're going to be deep diving into each of those with us. But I'm curious to know why you chose to start with truth. Tell us a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, truth has a couple things that are really important. I think the first thing is truth creates hope. You know, I think there's a lot to even the comedy, but, you know, what happens with a great comedian is he or she has the ability typically to convey to the audience that they understand the audience's predicament before the audience has to tell that comedian. And what that means is you make this connection. You validate that how you feel really is appropriate. And so I think, you know, if we really want people to go to risk, if we really want people to be creative, if we really want people to extend, I think the first thing we have to do is meet them where they're at. And so there are truths in our organizations and truths in our relationships and truths in our operating cultures that I think if leaders recognize them and acknowledge them, I think all of a sudden people have a new sense of hope, and you begin to change the spirit. I mean, I think one thing we have found is that, you know, and I think Bossidy said it years ago, realism is at the heart of execution. I think realism is also at the heart of engagement. If people feel that what we're doing is real and it's relevant and it's truthful, then I think they're willing to come in with their discretionary effort. If we feel it's kind of a play it safe or say what wants to be heard or don't speak power to truth or truth to power, then I think then you only get what the perception is that's acceptable rather than what's real. And so if you really are into creating a truthful start, an honest assessment of where we are, I think it's the catalyst for everything else.
Well, it's good that you said that, because we've got some questions that are actually going to link to that. I've got 4 or 5 really good questions, Jim, that I'm going to pitch you. So I'd like to start with a question from Kevin about the reasons people don't speak up or tell the truth. So I know this is a place where you have a lot of experience and you've seen some wisdoms, and we're not talking necessarily about data or anything official, but just a gut read from you. What are the top reasons that people don't speak up or tell the truth? Why would they resist? And I know you gave us those quotes from an employee perspective, yeah, but how would you summarize it, maybe down to 2?
Well, I think the 2 that the research shows is the first reason people don't speak up is because there's fear that there's consequences to candor, and those consequences aren't positive. Mm-hmm. So that's the first one. So even if the fear is if leaders say, I want to hear what you really think and feel, there's still the perception that if I say something that might be critical, there's negative consequences. I think the second reason is if I say something, it really won't matter because it won't be listened to. So one is punitive and the other is, kind of just ignorance or ignore. And so those are the two. I think if I had a third one, the reason that people don't speak the truth is because their first reaction is still to defend. And so, we call it the other guy, but I can't tell you how many times when we talk about change and creating, authentic environments, even senior leaders still tend to think that if somebody else would change, we'd be a lot better off versus I need to change. And I think part of that's just this defensivism that comes up. We typically say that the need to change is not an indictment of your past performance, but I think there's a fair number of people at all levels of an organization that might hear that but don't let it sink in, because the minute we start telling the truth and somehow it might sting and I might associate myself with it, then I might feel that somehow I did something wrong.
So can you bridge that to readiness? Like when you go in and work with these organizations, and you gave us examples of like a home builder and a manufacturer and some truth statements, how do you know when an organization is ready to go ahead and embrace truth telling? How do you know it's going to happen for them? Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good question. I'm not sure anybody's really ready. I can remember a couple CEOs where we put out a water cooler cartoon, and their first reaction was, maybe we shouldn't have this meeting because they saw it somewhat as an indictment. And so, but I think part of the readiness is to look at how organizations are using this and how it's working. So, the multiple cartoon examples that I used are for large companies, and begin to challenge the mindset that only sick or unhealthy companies have realities that are unattractive or distasteful or even dysfunctional. Healthy companies have those. As a matter of fact, every company has those. As long as change swirls around us, there are going to be things internally that we're out of step with and that we need to address. And so I think part of it is just to get some people familiar with how it works. I think to really let people experience it. There's one company that I remember is we laid out a cartoon with, and again, the cartoon comes from our interviews. We just believe that don't turn it into a deck because the decks go in the drawers and nothing happens, so make the deck come to life with imagery. And so I can still remember there were 12 men and women around the table, and the lawyer said, this is ridiculous, this is unfair, this is horrendous, and this is stupid, And so clearly he wasn't ready. And unfortunately, nobody said anything for 60 seconds, and it was the longest 60 seconds I can remember. And then finally somebody said in the team, Charlie, where do you think they got this from? They talked to us. We gave this to them individually, but we don't give it to each other collectively. And so and then the next person spoke up, and the next person, and before long, they were ready. But I think there's a point at which you have to help people change your mindset to, reality is not an indictment, reality is not a criticism, negative reality is not somehow, a vote on the quality of your leadership. Embracing reality is the catalyst for growth. And if we can change that mindset, that the real organizations that find reality and even the adversity in reality use it to grow faster, farther, and in more connected community than other teams and organizations, and they have an experience where that's true, then I think it can work. But if you just sit back and think about it in concept, I think a lot of your perceptions tend to be that, we're not going to do that because somehow I'm going to be, looked at in a bad light.
Okay, so you're striking a chord, and we're getting lots of action in the chat. So I've got two questions that are related to getting to the truth, and then two questions that relate to emanating it. So let me give you the two that relate to getting to it. Is there such thing as being truthful, and how do we go about getting the truth?
Yep. It's really a good question. So I think the challenge is that the truth has to be a shared truth. and the truth, therefore, has to be chosen by the team. So what I mean by that is if I interviewed 12 members of a team and then I told them what the truth was, that will never work. So that's not getting at the truth. Getting at the truth is interviewing 12 members of the team, putting all the components of a potential truth on the table, and then let the team decide which of those are most relevant, most real, and most impactful. And that becomes the truth. And every time, it works every time. The way we do that often is, we either look at a cartoon or we look at the Post-it notes on a wall and we say each leader gets to check the 3 images or quotes or areas on the wall or on the cartoon that they think are really key and truthful and holding us back. And when you step back from that, there are almost always 5 to 7 of them that have multiple checks on that become our shared truth. And then we tell what's that story of the shared truth just by looking at the connected dots. And then we also then convert those into truth statements. But my point being is the shared truth is developed by the team, not by a facilitator. And they typically really, once they feel it's safe, they'll quickly kind of sort of point out which ones they think are the most harmful or which ones are the most inhibitors or roadblocks to or speed bumps to our future success. So I had one person come up to me once and they said, one of the things that happens around here is we all walk around with our version of the truth, and it's all different. What you really did is you took a moment for us to really decide what is the single version of truth of which we all own together. And I think that becomes a real important distinction.
Okay, Jim, we've got a couple of people that are going to be leaving us at the half hour, and I've got one more question that I definitely want to work in on their behalf, and I want to let the rest of you know that if you have longer to stay with us, I will continue to pitch questions to Jim. So the next question I have is a combo question that relates to emanating a culture of truth-telling. How do you do that in environments that are virtual or geographically dispersed, and what if negativity prevails? Those are some barriers to emanating a truth-telling culture. Yes, please respond.
Okay, let me give you 3 crazy ideas on emanate, and then if it prevails. So sometimes we need helpers. We do this maybe once at a retreat or an offsite or whatever, and we come up with the truth statements, and then there's an old line that I'm fond of, and that is that if you know 5 languages and you hit your thumb with a hammer, you cuss in your native language. Mm-hmm. So once we get back in the organization and the pressure hits, we go back to our old behaviors or go back to our old way of operating. So I think we have found that a lot of organizations try to find artifacts or ways to challenge the truth. So let me give you 3 examples. We had one organization that decided now as a team met that they would have red cards and yellow cards like from soccer, and any time they felt we weren't being truthful, everybody had the permission to put up a yellow card or red card. And it just became a habit, and it actually perpetuated the safety that was necessary for someone to stand up and challenge something we were doing that they didn't think was right or truthful. So that was one example. Another healthcare company bought these plastic squirrels, and one of their truths was we always go down these little rat holes and squirrel holes, and we never stay on task, and as a result, our business is suffering and our patients are suffering. So they had 2 or 3 squirrels on the table, and when they felt they were doing it again, somebody would just throw the squirrel to the middle of the table, and it worked for them. And then the third one was a boxing ring, and so every month this team would have a boxing ring, and you would put a Post-it note in the boxing ring on an issue that we thought we needed to battle to clarity or battle to truth because it wasn't occurring. Each one of those examples were of very large companies and very senior teams. And so what you sometimes need is a way to operationalize that is a little bit light, but makes it safe to really go back to the truth. So that's the first part of the question in terms of, how do you make that something that's regular and work it through an organization. And actually, other teams below those teams also pick that up. Your second question was again, Rochelle?
Negative. When people, you're swimming upstream on this,
I think we see this a little bit like behavioral contracting. So my experience has been that we should spend more time with the people that really want to perpetuate truth-telling and less time on the negative. We did this a couple times, and I can remember a gentleman that spoke up at least 6 or 7 times and was negative and against it and all that. And finally, the peer pressure rose to the occasion. They said, you know, Bob, we know how you feel about this. We know, you know, we feel different, so you've made it very clear. Would you mind stop, you know, interrupting us with the negative comments, because what we're trying to do here is challenge and change something we believe in. They won't do that on the first time, and they won't do it on the second. But, you know, if you continue to really create a new culture of truth-telling, people will value it so much that they'll start to self-police it with their peers. And that has been absolutely what I've seen happen in some really interesting situations.
Excellent. Jim, we are still 50 strong, so I'm going to keep pitching as long as you're swinging the bat.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right,
yeah.
okay. You actually kind of snuck into this safety when you were answering the question about how we emanate it. You gave the example of the yellow cards and the red cards and the boxing ring, and that is a big question, and it's coming from several of our participants. How do you help people feel safe? You know, how do you counteract this tendency for them to only go to certain people? What other things have you seen that help with safety?
Yeah, let's reiterate the first thing I said, and that is once we decide on the truths, whatever those might be, so let's assume they're for a team. We do it for an organization too, but let's assume it's for a team. The things that we're dissatisfied with is by the creation of everyone on that team, even if you've only been there for 2 weeks, you know. And so it's this shared vulnerability. You know, there's something we don't like that we're all the co-authors of, and so none of us, you know, are sort of free from being part of the architects of this. I think that helps. And the one question we ask is, how have you contributed? We always have the CEO or the leader of the team go first, because once they go first, you know, and they acknowledge it, it does create a new sort of air for others to do the same. So I think that that's one way to do it for sure. I think as you look at this whole issue of vulnerability, I think it's kind of interesting. I don't know that we have a lot of people that have had a lot of examples of what vulnerability looks like, and so, but I think vulnerability is probably one of the keys. You know, and we have places where we actually begin to define behaviors that are vulnerable. You know, it's asking for help, it's acknowledging you're contributed to it. I think the one thing, Rochelle, though, that probably rises above all of these is something we call the other guy. And so in almost all organizations, we find that there's this thing called the other guy. I'll give you a quick story, and I'll make it real quick. But years ago, we were working with a gentleman who was a psychologist and started working in prisons. And so as he went into the prison, he would always interview the prisoner and ask how they got there. So the first one he went to, and he said, you know, how did you get here? And he goes, it was the craziest thing. My friends called me. They said, let's go have a beer. I was watching the game, so I was minding my own business. I get in the back seat of their car. We go to the carryout. They rob the carryout. We flee the police. We hit a tree. I fall out of the back seat. I had nothing to do with this, and here I am in jail, and it wasn't even me. It was the other guys. He said, I went to the second cell, and I asked, how did you get here? And he goes, well, I look just like my cousin. So they mixed me up with my cousin. He said there wasn't a single cell that I went to that I didn't find out that the reason that prisoner was there is because of the other guy. He said, then when I started working with corporate America, I would go to manufacturing and ask them how come things are the way they are around here, and they would say, well, you wouldn't believe how horrible marketing is in terms of the things they sort of sell to the marketplace that we have to make that aren't even makeable. And then I'd go to marketing, and they say, well, you know, manufacturing couldn't make you know, a silly string if they had to. They just have. Because every single function I went to, there was another guy that was preventing somebody from doing a better job. So I think one of the things you have to do early on is call out the other guy. Each one of us claim that the other guy has to do something for us to get better, but we are the other guy. And so the more you make that conscious in public, the more it becomes less of an excuse and more of a catalyst to the truth, and each individual sort of acknowledging the truth and then collectively deciding we need to do something about it.
The concept of personal leadership did come up in our chat. There was a participant that commented on the importance of that, Jim, so you nailed that. Here's what we've got going. I've got one more question that I know for sure I need to pitch based on what we already have in the chat. I want to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of our participants. So while you're answering this is my last call for a question, and this is what I would say to participants. If I did not ask your question in the way you intended or you did not somehow get your answer, would you please restate it in the chat so I have it while we're doing this? New comments are still welcome, but Jim, this is the one that I know I still have from what we have in the chat right now, okay? Okay, how does truth-telling, what is the impact of truth-telling on the long-term performance? Okay, we get a culture going now and we're good at truth-telling. What do we notice about the long-term performance of the organization and the company? What can you say about that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the long-term performance, I just think the reason I went to truth first, I think it begins to build trust. So, and when trust goes up, transaction costs go down. So what that means is we go faster. That means we go with assuming positive intent. It means we go with a sense of community and camaraderie. So, I think the long-term performance is affected first and foremost in those areas. I think the other one is that the long-term performance, the concept of challenge, it becomes as common as breathing. And so how do we self-attack? So, maybe the first time we do truth-telling, it's because we've got some pretty dysfunctional things around here we should address. But the next times we begin to do it, it becomes much more of a self-attack, and that self-attack is a hugely positive aspect of performance because now all of a sudden, we're trying to change and challenge what we do before our competitors or customers do it for us. And so I think those are probably the areas that first come to mind.
Good. Okay, I've got one more question from our last call, Jim, and then I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your book as a closing comment to our time together. This is kind of a tactical thing. You talk a lot about seeking the truth and drawing it out of organizations. The question is, when you interview, do you do it individually, and do you survey the group first? So a little bit of that dynamic behind finding the truth. Can you talk about that?
Yep. No, I think we do. I mean, I think what we have found is that we'll interview people individually for the first pass of this. I think, what we have found, rightly or wrongly, is that people will tell us the truth individually, but they won't address it with each other collectively. And so that's the first version of SAFE. So in other words, and you'd be stunned at how many times this is very senior teams in very large organizations that still won't tell each other the truth. I had CEOs mention that, we don't talk to each other, we talk past each other, we talk by each other, and we don't talk to each other. And so I think the first thing you have to do is really, get that confidential assessment from each of the individuals individually, and probably in most cases, make sure that it becomes, confidential. It's anonymous, so it doesn't become attributed to anyone, and it only becomes attributed when, as a team, they decide to pick which ones really matter. But I do think, the individual interviews are really important, and then I think the individual interviews become the content thematically for either the wall of reality or for the cartoons. What we're trying to do is get people to see what it is they're saying, and then decide collectively if that's what they meant. But I think that becomes part of the SAFE process. I think as you begin to do it more often, then whether it's the boxing ring or the squirrels or the fight cards, yellow card, red card, then you got to find a way. Now, how does this work continuously? And I think you begin to create a culture of that perpetuates. But early on, you've just got to do everything you can to make it safe.
Oh, we've had such a great group of participants, Jim. They have just absolutely drawn out some of the best stories and examples and just overall thoughts from you. And, we started with truth. In the Blind Spots book, we've got purpose, story, engagement, trust, and truth. And you'll be deep diving on these with us during this series. So I'm hoping that some of these guys will come back next time because their questions were very compelling. You get the last word, and it doesn't have to be about the book. It can be whatever's on your mind, but I just wanted to make sure that you close us out today.
No, I think, thank you, and thank you, Rochelle, for the way that you prompted all those questions. It's much more preferable from my standpoint to have a conversation than a presentation, and so I guess my only comment is that, you know, I do think some aspects of truth-telling is emotional intelligence connected, and as we all know, we don't change because of intellect, and we don't change because of facts, fear, or force. You know, we change because of what we feel, and more often we change because of our engagement and what we think. And so it just seems to be the first step that's so critical. We have often said that you can make change happen if you have an honest assessment of where you are and a clear picture of where you want to go. And so, and I think it's in that order. And people have asked us why, well, don't you have the vision or the clear picture first? And I think the answer is no, because you want people to bring all the best they have to offer and make it safe to do that, and then have a true shared sense of where we are that we're creatively dissatisfied with. So I actually think it's magical. I've seen people that hadn't talked to each other ever in organizations have conversations they'd never had before. But you have to make it safe, you have to make it shared vulnerability, and then you have to make it succinct enough that it creates the agenda for us to act on going forward. So thank you. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. This concludes our time with you today. You may go ahead and disconnect. We look forward to seeing you for our next series installment. Thank you.